In this presentation, we're going to learn about how to write a literature review. First, we're going to define a literature review and talk about how it functions and the kinds of situations in which you would need to write one. And we're going to do a brief genre analysis of a literature review to understand its main features. We're going to talk about two of the main skills needed, which are grouping sources into themes as well as synthesis, and then we're going to conclude with takeaways. And I encourage you to pause the video at any time if you need more time to digest the information on the screen. So first, let's define a literature review. So at the most basic level, a literature review is a discussion and a critique of existing literature. So what that means is that you are going to take the various research on a topic and you're going to discuss what the research says and also critique it by pointing out potential avenues for more research. A literature review shows how sources relate to one another by organizing them into sub-themes. So as we'll see in our genre analysis, it's really common in literature reviews to talk about the various themes within the literature as a way to kind of analyze the various patterns. It's also important to note that a literature review summarizes an existing conversation and it explains how the researcher will add on to it. So in other words, when you write a literature review, you're basically saying this is what other researchers have found, and they haven't necessarily addressed this particular topic that I'm interested in looking at, and therefore I'm going to add onto it in a particular way. So if you need to write a literature review, you've probably been working on what would be called an IMRD research paper, which is a paper that follows an intro, methods, results, and discussion structure. That they often appear in the introduction section, but they're also their own empirical research genre. So sometimes you'll stumble upon literature reviews as published research, and they're called systematic literature reviews because they look through a lot of different databases and try to find out what's the most recent research on a topic, what are the trends within that research, and then where is there a need for more research. So just a quick review again of what is an IMRD report. So it stands for Intro, Methodology, Results, and Discussion, and it's just a structure that's used for lab reports. It's really common in social sciences, natural sciences, engineering, and computer science. And these are the main structures, the main sections of it. So the introduction really makes a case for your research. It tells the reader, what other research has been done and carves out the niche that you are going to be filling. Then it has the methods section where you tell readers how you conducted your study, the results where you present what you found from your study, the discussion where you connect your findings to that prior literature and research, and then typically a conclusion. But these are the main sections, and the literature review fits within the introduction because the literature review helps make a case for your research. So there are several different rhetorical functions that literature reviews serve. So the first thing that's important to note is that they really signal to your reader that you know what you're talking about. So it shows your reader that you understand the current literature in the field and that you have a study that is necessary because you're basically doing your due diligence and saying, I have looked to see what research has been done, and I see that there's a need for research that I'm going to fulfill through my study. So you point out the gap. You'll hear that word a lot when people talk about literature reviews, a gap. So it's like, here's all of this research that has been done, but there's a gap or a missing part of the research that I'm going to do. So at this level, we don't use literature to support our claims. So whenever you're at writing research papers where you're just kind of sharing other people's research, you might write a position paper where you're arguing a particular side, and then you use research to support your claims. But at this level of writing a literature review for an IMRD research paper or writing a systematic literature review, we use the literature to figure out more research opportunities. So we use the literature to kind of signal the direction we need to go in, and then we do our study. Then we report on our results. And then in the discussion section, we talk about how our findings kind of support, complicate, and extend other researchers' findings. So you revisit the literature. So there are a lot of different purposes of a literature review. So I want you to think about what it does for you as a researcher. And at the most basic level, it establishes your ethos or your credibility because it shows that you have read other literature and that you understand the current conversation. It also describes that conversation that you're entering so that your reader understands what the various threads of research are and why yours is needed. It also helps to locate your work in the literature. So it helps you to show your reader kind of where your study fits into other research. It also helps you to avoid research that has already been done because as you read other people's research, you're going to notice that a lot of research has been done, and this helps you to avoid doing something that's not necessary. Literature reviews also help you to show respect to other scholars by acknowledging the work that you're building upon. But you can also kind of subtly critique and respond to prior research. So for example, you might notice that there are a lot of studies that use a particular method, but you see a need for the method that you're going to use. So you're kind of subtly critiquing and saying, this prior research is really helpful, but we also need my study. And it also teaches you how other people have studied the problem. So for example, you might be coming up with a study and you want to know how other people have already studied that topic so that you can see potential pitfalls and limitations. So we're going to look at an example of a literature review and notice some different features such as the length and then the various rhetorical moves and skills that are required. Okay, so at this point, I would recommend that you pause the video, and there's a link to this document in the description of this video, and so you can go ahead and open it up, and then just go ahead and pause and take a couple of minutes to read it, and then return to the PowerPoint. Okay, and when you return, I'm going to point out to you a couple of the main things that I want you to notice, but I hope that you did this on your own first. So the first thing to notice is that the introduction establishes the need. It points out that creativity is a necessary skill, and that several scholars have been studying that, but that there isn't enough research that looks at the relationship between creativity and freelance writing. So it's pointing out that this is something people care about, but there's surprisingly little research in this particular area. And then it explains kind of why that matters. So teachers need to understand these working conditions to prepare students. And then it carves out the research and how it responds to the need. So it says that it explores this particular topic, which responds to the need for research. And it describes briefly the methods. And then it goes into a more detailed literature review. So this description of the methods is just kind of previewing the rest of the study, but the bulk of the literature review really starts under background and significance. And there are a couple things to notice here. One is notice the use of headings. So we have this heading, Freelance Writers in TCPW Scholarship, which stands for Technical Communication and Professional Writing. And this is grouping that literature together. And then there's a separate section that looks at creativity in technical communication, professional writing scholarship. So we already know that there are two themes here. There's literature that deals with freelance writing, and there's literature that deals with creativity. And we have the two headings to kind of indicate those different sections. And then we follow with the research questions. So one of the main genre functions that you're going to see here is the use of subheadings and grouping literature into themes. But you'll also notice that there's typically synthesis. So synthesis is the bringing together of multiple ideas, and we'll look more closely at that in just a moment. Okay, so this first major skill that you're going to need to write a successful literature review is that you're going to need to understand how to group by theme. So it really helps to think of the literature that you collected on your annotated bibliography or reference list in terms of spheres or areas. And the reason for this is because it allows you to organize the conversation for the reader. So You can organize by particular subtopic, or maybe you have several articles that take a particular position or use a specific methodology and you group them together. But you want to aim for 2 to 3 spheres or themes. So for example, if your study is about how workplace writers use brainstorming techniques to improve their creativity, your spheres are workplace writing, brainstorming techniques, and creativity. Keep in mind that more literature is not necessarily better. It can be very challenging to kind of wrangle a ton of literature, so you really do need to be selective. Okay, so you might pause the video at this point and kind of do a little workshopping with the sources that you've collected. Specifically, you might tag them as being part of various themes. So you probably have your references organized alphabetically, but you could even use like hashtags or headings to indicate the various spheres. So you can go ahead and kind of pause and organize the references by themes. There are also several different tools that you can use, and I'm just going to kind of point them out to you. So Zotero, Mendeley, RefWorks, and Scrivener are all they're all software where you can upload your citations and PDFs of your articles, and it's really helpful for kind of organizing your research. So I use Zotero, for example, and what I can do is I can put kind of like keyword tags on various articles, and then I can search for them by theme. So it keeps me organized. So essentially, you want to think of your topic like a block of marble that's just full of possibilities. Your topic is like the block of marble before there's a horse carved out, right? So you could carve many things out of the marble, out of the body of literature that you've reviewed. Your job is to carve away everything that isn't the horse. So say that you have this block of marble and there's 2 horses and a dog in the material. Your job is only to carve away 1 horse. The point is you have to choose one topic and you need to commit to it. The literature that you have has a lot of possibilities of directions that you could go in, but you need to carve out the picture of what your research topic is, and that's what you do through the literature review. So another great thing you can do if you pause the video is you can actually create some sort of a visual to map your literature into spheres. So say you have your topic at the center, like creative thinking and writing, you have these various spheres that relate to it. And you can see my example here. I like to use the tool Drawio, which is just, I'll show you D-R-A-I-O, Drawio, but you can really use anything. You can even just use a piece of paper. But you can make a diagram here. You can click Create New Diagram, and you can do a blank diagram and create it. And then you can just kind of start putting shapes in the center. So for example, you can put a circle in the center, and if your topic is sports injuries during COVID, then you might notice that you have like literature that has to do with routines. Maybe you have another sphere of literature that has to do with nutrition, things like that. And so then you're going to put, like, say that the people who have to do with routines are like Smith 2019 and Jones 2015. And then your nutrition people are different people. So then you would have, under your lit review, you would have a heading that says sports injuries during COVID. You'd have a subheading for routines, and in it you would talk about both Smith and Jones's piece. So again, go ahead and pause the video and map out your literature into spheres. Okay, so we've talked about the skill of mapping your literature into spheres, grouping it by theme, and using subheadings within your literature review. So now let's talk about the other major skill you need, which is synthesis. So synthesis sounds like a fancy word, but it's actually a skill that you use every day to make decisions. So for example, when you decided what to major in, you probably explored various opinions and websites and maybe consulted different people. And then you really thought about how these different perspectives work together. So you might have had a thought like, people A and B think I should major in X, but website C and D and expert D suggest Y. So the key is that you're actually going to reference all of these different sources and show the similarities and differences between them. And a key to kind of checking that you have synthesized is that you should have multiple sources in the same paragraph and show how they speak to one another. So let's look at an example. And this is actually a template that you can use to compare and contrast different sources. So you might even pause the video here and take out some of your sources and try it. So you could say, with reference to blank, X author describes blank by saying blank. Y author, on the other hand, agrees that blank, but instead concludes that blank. So you're showing the difference. Y author agrees to an extent, but also has a different conclusion. And then once you have kind of integrated those sources, then you can kind of say how they speak to one another. So thus, X and Y both emphasize blank, but they differ in terms of blank. And then you can state the need for your own research. So this leads to the need to better understand blank. Let's look at an example of this from the literature review that I shared with you earlier, the genre analysis that you did. So go ahead and pause the video and read through it. I'm not going to read through it in the video. And when you're done, you'll notice several different things. So first of all, this is like a chunk out of the middle of a paragraph, so it would need a topic sentence, so just keep that in mind. But notice that here I discuss Haley, Cox, and Loader's study where they evaluate 45 careers of professional communicators, and they argue, and then I have a quote, and then I say that they don't examine the type of innovations that freelance technical communication professional writers to engage in. And then I kind of compare that to Zhang and Kittelong's study, which suggests what restrains creativity. But then I say that given their studies focus on non-freelancers, more work is needed. So I'm showing the comparisons and contrasts between these two studies, and then I'm carving out space for my research. So keep in mind too, and again, you might want to pause the screen here and kind of read through this, that you need to kind of aim for the level at the bottom here. So a lot of times student writers or kind of developing writers, they will focus on compiling sources, but they won't necessarily comment on them. So for example, in this top example, the writer says there are several definitions of authentic materials, and then Noonan defines, Lee conjectures, Chava and Taylor claim, Widowson refers to, and it's just a list, right? So it is talking about these different authors, but it's just kind of listing them. A little bit better is to have some interpretive comments. So we start with Noonan and then Lee, and then this sentence says, however, Chavez echoes Taylor's earlier sentiment in claiming that these definitions are too broad. So this is interpretive because it's showing the connection between Taylor and Chavez, which the previous paragraph didn't do. But the even better example is the one at the very bottom. So you're integrating the sources, and you're also showing how they relate to one another. So again, talking about the way authentic materials have been defined. And then it's, instead of just kind of quoting each author, it shares a view that is shared by both Noonan and Lee. And then shows how scholars like Widowson have this partly different perspective. So it's more so interpreting and grouping the various pieces together. So in conclusion, a literature review discusses and critiques literature and research, and it makes an argument for the need for further research. So it's important you're not siding with a particular perspective in your literature review. Instead, you're pointing out why your research is needed. In order to do this successfully, you're going to group your literature into spheres or themes, and you're going to use headings to kind of mark to the reader what the theme is. And then within each theme, you're synthesizing multiple sources, so showing how they connect to one another and interpreting how they connect to the larger conversation. And through all of this, you'll be able to write a literature review. It's a complex genre, so take your time with it and practice and look back at the examples if needed. Thank you.